Baby steps.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and I've been sharing a book that I've written called You're Not Broken, Just Rewiring, which highlights my approach to therapy and overall mental health and well-being. Now, these next several chapters make up part 2 of the book, which I think will be especially interesting to those of you here at Infants on Thrones, because I put myself and my Mormon-formed mind under the microscope much more than I did in part 1. Here we explore why and how my brain was wired to find inspiration in channeled material of all places, my own embarrassment and critical approaches to all that, and the science I learned along the way to help me deal with that inner dissonance. Now, while I've pretty much finished my writing of the book, I'm still in the process of adding endnotes to each chapter. And I'm looking for beta readers who would be willing to read the book and offer feedback that I can use for those endnotes. So if you'd like to be one of those beta readers, please reach out to me at infantsonthrones@gmail.com. I'll continue to release these audio-style chapters every other day throughout the month of July and into the first week of August. I hope to have the print version complete with endnotes all ready to publish by the end of August. So that's what we're doing. All right? Now then. Hold on to your hats and glasses.
This here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
Chapter 10. The Science of the Gene Keys. Is it just me, or does part of you long for poetry, while another part won't believe it unless it's peer-reviewed? Last chapter, we listened to the gene keys, not as doctrine, but as frequency, myth, metaphor, mirror. We didn't ask it to be proven. We asked it to land. And for many, it did. Quietly, like an echo that didn't need a source to feel true. But some of us were raised to argue with echoes. Some of us, like me, can't completely relax into metaphor unless the nervous system gets a nod from neuroscience. For me, that nod sounds like a clean study design, a well-cited source, or a trustworthy lab coat saying, yes, this happens in the body too. It's not always conscious. I'm not even aware of it most of the time. That feeling like someone is constantly looking over my shoulder, checking to see if I did it right. Every I dotted, every T crossed, every source attributed to its correct intellectual lineage without diluting or impurifying it with unverifiable speculation. We train scholars here. That's what was written in bright red ink. Invalidating crimson was the exact shade, I believe, following the oversized F for the honest essay answer I gave to the question, what do you plan to do with your folklore degree? It was my first semester in graduate school, a class that was meant to introduce us to the scholarly discipline of folkloristics. It was the final essay question of the final exam, and I just didn't know how to answer it. At the time, I had just created a murder mystery game based on Camelot. I was pitching it to a company that had shown some interest, and I'd entertained the idea, just entertained it, that maybe I could build a career from that place, that maybe games and myth and imagination had value, that maybe folklore could belong in a room full of laughter, not just footnotes. But the red pen said no. The institution said no. We train scholars here. Elitism in the ivory tower. Pesky Orion influences again. And that tension stayed with me throughout my graduate experience. The part of me that loved teaching and connecting with my students, and the part of me that tiptoed around professors, stressing about research, publication, and achieving tenure, of proving to the rest of the academic world that the discipline of folkloristics belonged, because it was more than just the cute little brother of cultural anthropology. Professional insecurities that I didn't totally understand, but felt to my core. I eventually left academia, but academia never fully left me. So that's what these next 3 chapters are. Not a contradiction of what came before, but a co-regulator, the second strand of the helix, the part of the spiral where inspiration becomes integration, where story and structure start speaking the same language. Because that's how I was wired, to need both, to chase meaning like a treasure, to fight for understanding like I was arguing with my father, to seek coherence not just in words, but in nervous system response. My father used to wish he were a Vulcan, not as a joke, not for Halloween, as a way of being. He admired their clarity, their control, their strict devotion to logic. Emotions were messy, inefficient. He saw the beauty in order, the nobility of precision. He was a lawyer. Meticulous, pedantic, pragmatic. He took everything apart to find its fault line, not because he was cruel, but because he believed truth lived in clean lines. Ambiguity wasn't an invitation. It was a threat. And I absorbed that. Arguments were a type of love language in our home. Rebuttal was a rite of passage. Correcting other people was an act of compassion. I learned to defend ideas before I understood them, to anticipate critique before I felt the value of expressing curiosity. Then I took that internal attorney to graduate school. Twice. I spent my mid-20s to early 30s getting academically fluent in evidence-based everything. I needed it to be cited. I needed it to be validated. I needed it to stand up in court. So when I encountered Richard Rudd and the Gene Keys, this lush, luminous tapestry of archetypes and energetic frequencies, something split in me. One part softened instantly. Something in the language bypassed my defenses and landed in the marrow. It didn't ask to be believed. It just offered a pattern, a rhythm, a truth my body seemed to remember. And another part, my father's part, my training's part, crossed its arms and said, "All right, but show me the mechanism." That's the part I'm speaking to now. It's not just me. The pursuit of truth often feels like following 2 strands of the same mystery, one made of intuition, the other of evidence, twisting endlessly around each other like a double helix. One strand, resonance, the part of me lit up by Ra, Seth, the Gene Keys, not as beliefs but as biochemical signals, as if my nervous system remembered something my language hadn't caught up to yet. But on the other strand, verification, the part of me trained to argue, to prove, to explain it in ways that might convince the father in my mind, or the academic committee, or the skeptical listener, or just myself. This chapter lives on in that second strand. Let me show you the thinkers who whispered back. Sensing beyond the senses. I first encountered David Eagleman in a YouTube video. He was talking about the Umwelt, a German word that means surrounding world. But in biology, it means something more precise, the slice of reality a creature can perceive. Each organism lives inside its own sensory bubble. A tick doesn't hear. It detects butyric acid, the scent of mammalian skin. A bat sees with sound. A snake senses heat. Every species evolves to detect what it needs in order to survive. Nothing more, nothing less. And humans? we see only a narrow sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, a fraction. The visible light our eyes can register is just one thin band on an immense invisible piano. There are entire symphonies of radiation, vibration, and signal moving through the air around us, through us, all the time, and we don't even notice. That hit me hard. I'd never thought about perception as a limit before. I thought of it as a given. But what Eagleman was saying and demonstrating was that reality is far wider than what our senses can access, and that the brain itself, particularly the neurons that interpret and respond to these signals, can adapt to new channels if given the right input. He showed a vest that translated sound into touch. Deaf users wore it across their torsos. Over time, their brains learned to hear through their skin. It wasn't a metaphor. It was rerouting, a living interface. And the neurons didn't resist. They reorganized effortlessly. That's when something clicked. Evolution didn't just shape what creatures could perceive. It shaped how flexible those perceptions could be. And the brain, the neurons, weren't just responding. They were reaching, not for truth, but for function, for signal, for survival. I had previously thought of neurons as switches, on or off. But now I saw them as translators, pattern recognizers, meaning makers, tiny, exquisite artists of adaptation. And if neurons could learn to hear through skin, what else might they be capable of? The esoteric systems call this expanded consciousness, higher densities, ascension. But here was a grounded biological metaphor. The nervous system is an interface, and interfaces can evolve. This wasn't mysticism, it was circuitry. And it gave me a language for what the gene keys describe. Not just metaphorical transformation, but mechanistic. From perception to expression. If David Eagleman helped me understand the nervous system as an adaptive interface, then Bruce Lipton was the one who first cracked open the door to what that interface might change, not just in how we perceive reality, but in how our biology responds to it. Lipton was a cell biologist at Stanford when he began to notice something odd. In his experiments with stem cells, each genetically identical, he observed that the type of cell each one became was entirely dependent upon the solution it was placed in. Bone, fat, muscle, same genome, different outcome. That meant the cell's environment was somehow sending information through the membrane, past the cellular machinery, and down into the nucleus, affecting which genes were expressed and which were not. This wasn't theoretical. It was observable, repeatable. It's what led Lipton to develop the framework he later shared in his book, The Biology of Belief. What changed me wasn't just the data, it was the metaphor. He suggested that the membrane of the cell acts more like a brain than the nucleus does, that it's the cell's ability to perceive and interpret its environment that determines how it behaves, grows, and expresses its genetic potential. That idea hit me like lightning. It made what Richard Rudd was saying in the Gene Keys feel less like spiritual metaphor and more like cellular strategy. It made me want to pay attention, not just to what I believed, but to what I was surrounded by. It made me ask, what is this doing? This thought, this moment, this posture, this pattern. How is this moment impacting me, deep within the nucleus of every cell of my body? Still, I knew how Lipton's work was viewed in certain circles, fringy, overly mystical, not serious science. And part of me wanted to dismiss it, just to avoid being dismissed myself. But that part, the academic voice in my head, the internalized red pen, wasn't content to leave it there. It wanted validation. So I looked, and I found it. Dr. Moshe Ziff and Dr. Michael Meany at McGill University conducted groundbreaking studies showing how maternal nurturing in rats could directly alter the epigenetic expression of stress-relating genes in the brain. In one of their most cited studies, published in Nature Neuroscience 2004, they showed that the offspring of attentive mothers developed more glucocorticoid. In other words, how safe you feel shapes how your genes behave. And then there was Dr. Eric Nestler, whose work on chronic stress, depression, and addiction showed how long-term environmental and emotional experiences lead to epigenetic remodeling of the brain, literally changing its structure and chemistry through gene regulation. Nestler's studies demonstrated that neuronal firing patterns under stress influence the release of transcription factors, which then activate or suppress genes related to mood, memory, and reward. Remember when I asked you to think of yourself as a living nervous system? Well, that nervous system, in all of these studies, is not just interpreting the world. It instructs your genome. Your thoughts don't float above your biology, they participate in it. Your perception isn't just a story, it's a signal, and your neurons are listening. This is what epigenetics teaches, that gene expression is not dictated from the inside out, it's shaped from the outside in. And that shaping happens through a cascade of biochemical messengers sparked by sensory input, filtered through nervous system response, and passed into the intimate architecture of the cell. Perception becomes biology. Interpretation becomes gene regulation. Environment becomes expression. And the nervous system? It's the translator, the DJ, the interface between meaning and molecule. Now, let's take all of this, the membrane, the message, the nervous system's translation of perception into biology, and place it back into the spiral of the gene keys. Because what they offer isn't just archetypal poetry. It's a language for these patterns, a way to track how the shadow conserves, how the gift emerges, and how the city stabilizes, not in metaphor alone, but in molecular expression. The shadow isn't a flaw, it's a freeze frame. Take the 28th gene key, the shadow of purposelessness, the gift of total commitment. When a person feels adrift, aimless, it's tempting to call that a character flaw. But from a nervous system perspective, it's not collapse, it's conservation, a pause in the playlist, a system sensing danger and switching tracks to preserve energy. That feeling of aimlessness, it may be the echo of a signal your body once needed to hear, a way to protect against wasted motion in an environment that didn't reward movement. Or maybe it's not even your original signal. Maybe it's one passed down, encoded epigenetically by a lineage that endured survival mode for far too long. Purpose doesn't emerge under pressure. It emerges under safety. And when safety returns, through therapy, ritual, rhythm, co-regulation, the system begins to update. The same circuitry that once shut down begins to risk again. The signal softens. The track shifts. That's not just poetry. That's polyvagal theory. Your dorsal vagal system immobilizes when threat is too great. It lowers metabolic output, tightens the breath, dims motivation, not as dysfunction but as design. But when the cues of safety return, your ventral system reactivates. Movement returns. Curiosity, expression, creativity. The shadow doesn't disappear. It relaxes. The gift doesn't arrive. It emerges. It was always there, just muted. This framework doesn't shame your symptoms. It dignifies them. It doesn't erase the wound. It honors wisdom. The shadow isn't blocking your gift. It contains it. Let's ground all this with a simple example. There's a short YouTube video I love showing in therapy called "It's Not About the Nail." In it, a woman is describing how overwhelmed she feels. So much pressure. Everything's snagging. Nothing feels right. Then the camera pans out and you see it. There's a huge nail sticking out of her forehead. Her partner, trying to be helpful, gently points out, "Well, you do have a nail in your forehead." And she snaps, "Stop it. You always do this. You're always trying to fix it. I just need you to listen." And that's the moment. Because he's not wrong, but he's also not seeing what's really going on. On the surface, he's offering a solution. But beneath the surface, beneath the form, his response is triggering a cascade of old chemistry. Invalidation, rejection, unsafety. Her nervous system floods with red chemistry. He's trying to help, but the way he does it keeps her in the shadow. Only when he softens, when he validates instead of fixes, does her system begin to shift. Just for a moment, her chemistry changes. Blue begins to rise. A different track starts to play. And then, of course, they bump heads again, literally. Back to the nail, back to the spiral. It's funny because it's true. Because it's biology. Shadow, gift, conflict, repair, frequency. Frequency is not a fluffy word. To the Vulcan in me, frequency used to feel suspicious. Spiritual fluff with no measurable grounding, until neuroscience reframed it. Your body runs on rhythm, heartbeat, breath, neural oscillations. Fear and stress, beta waves, rapid, scattered. Presence and rest, alpha, then theta, slow, synchronous, healing. These aren't spiritual metaphors. They're measurable waveforms. And when the gene keys speak of raising your frequency, they're pointing toward real shifts in neurophysiological states, new access to old circuits, a radio catching a clearer signal when the dial clicks into place. And that moment of clarity, that's where the mystical and the mechanistic meet. You can change the channel. Real life looks like this. Let me introduce you to Agatha, a composite client, a signal carrier. She came to therapy because she knew something wasn't working. Her stress levels were sky high. Her body ached. She couldn't sleep through the night. She didn't feel broken exactly, but she felt frayed, like her edges were always lit up, scanning, bracing, preparing. After a few sessions, a pattern began to emerge. She told me about her childhood, specifically about her mother. She was uncontrollable, Agatha said. Explosive, unpredictable. I never knew what version of her I was going to get. So, she adapted. She organized her environment as a way to feel safe. Lined up her toys, smoothed out her voice. She became the emotional thermostat of the house, constantly adjusting herself to regulate someone else. Fast forward 25 years. Agatha is a mother now. Her kids feel her stress. Her husband walks on eggshells. She catches herself micromanaging everything. Dinner plans, school projects, the right way to load the dishwasher. She knows she's doing it. She knows it's exhausting, and she knows it's not working. I want to stop controlling everything, she told me, but I don't know how. It feels like if I don't hold it all together, something bad will happen. That's not dysfunction. That's history. That's a shadow. In the Gene Keys language, we could say she was living through the shadow of control, not as a character flaw, but as a survival strategy. Her nervous system had learned that safety depended on precision, predictability, management. And the truth is, she wasn't wrong. As a child, her system did create coherence. In an unpredictable home, her instinct to control her surroundings was a brilliant, adaptive solution. It worked. It helped her regulate against chaos. But now, that same strategy had become maladaptive. The neural pathways that once kept her safe were keeping her stuck. And as we worked together, and as she began to feel safe enough to let the old pattern soften, something shifted. She started noticing the space between impulse and action. One day, she came into session really excited. She told me how earlier in the week, something had just clicked. She caught herself reaching out to correct her son's crooked collar on his shirt for the third time and paused. She didn't say anything. She just breathed. Let him wear it crooked, she thought. That pause, that's the gift. In this case, the gift of authority. Not in the authoritarian sense, but in the somatic sense. The authority to respond, not react. To lead from presence, not panic. To trust that her worth didn't depend on her control. And that moment of pause wasn't just symbolic. It was neurobiological. She had just interrupted a long-established neural pattern. And in that space, her brain began forming a new one. She was discovering her ability to shape the architecture of her own mind, to rewire her internal world, one breath, one crooked shirt at a time. And then she saw it clearly. The old pathways had kept her safe in a world that truly was unsafe. But the new world, this family, this moment, wasn't her childhood. Her son's shirt didn't have to be straight, because her world wouldn't fall apart if it wasn't. She could tolerate the wrinkle, because she was no longer trapped inside the old story. And over time, that tolerance grew into trust. She laughed more, slept better, started trusting her family with the small messes, the crooked collars, the chaos of being alive. That's not just a personality change. That's a physiological repatterning. That's a nervous system reorienting from protection to connection, a brain learning a new rhythm. Her shadow of control was the seed. When she saw that and rerouted it, the gift of authority emerged as the sprout. The more she did this, the more the city began to bloom. Her willingness to stay present even when her instinct said to control or flee. The courage to let go of old survival strategies even when they felt familiar. The strength to soften. The power to trust. The dignity of choosing love over fear, moment by moment. Because shadow doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are growing. Rewiring into gift. Rewiring into city. Because we're not broken. We're rewiring. Always. The spiral so far. In Chapter 7, we encountered the raw contact, service to other, polarity, and layers of self. Chapter 8 introduced Seth, consciousness as vibration, thought as creative field. Chapter 9 invited the gene keys, myth, memory, mutation. And here, in Chapter 10, we grounded that spiral in science, perception, epigenetics, nervous system patterning. We met the mechanism beneath the metaphor. Up next, Seth again, but this time with the microscope turned on. Let's keep spiraling.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.